All right, we're on to Paladin now. So let's start with the Paladin legendary. I don't know how this pronounces. Eadric the Pure. So there's a 7-cost 3/7 with Battlecry. Change all enemy minions attack to 1. Now this is very cool. This is a way for Paladins to interact with a bunch of opposing enemy minions, and really neutralize large boards. Paladins are actually already quite good at neutralizing opposing boards because they already have a quality, they already have consecration. So this is sort of weird because Paladins already have the tools to deal with a bunch of opposing stuff. Granted, it is based on sort of combos with equality and consecration, and those are not necessarily easy to assemble. But this is certainly a card that can definitely have a role in controlling Paladin style decks because you don't necessarily have all that many consecrations, all that many qualities, and this can definitely be a very powerful way to neutralize a huge opposing board. Whether it's against something like Handlock, they play multiple giants. You just play one card, and you've now largely neutralized all of your opponent's giants. And a 7-cost 3/7, it's like that body is not incredible, but the body is not attached to the effect. This is a Battlecry effect. So even if your opponent just easily kills Eadric, whatever his name is, you still have gotten a huge value out of the Battlecry alone. So I would not be surprised to see this show up in competitive Paladin decks. It's a more defensive version of something like Dr. Boom. Dr. Boom has a big swing proactively. This has a big swing reactively. So your opponent is able to establish a big board presence. This can definitely help take care of it. It's weak against decks like Druid, where even having just a bunch of weak minions in play is dangerous because of cards like Savage Roar. And obviously it's potentially dangerous against decks that have access to lots of silence effects because you can't rely on the creature being permanently neutralized. But I definitely think that this is a card that is likely to see at least some amount of play competitively, especially if decks like Handlock that are built around establishing a large board presence are very popular. So exciting card, and I expect it to see play. Tuskarr Jouster. So this is the first card that we've talked about that has the Joust mechanic, which is kind of similar to Clash from Magic the Gathering. This is an effect that is going to be better in general when you are playing against an aggressive deck. Because if you are playing a deck that has a significant number of high-cost minions, and you're playing against a deck like, say, Face Hunter, you'll usually win most jousts because you have more big minions in your deck. It's going to be much less reliable if you're playing as a deck like Handlock, where you are much less likely to have high-value minions, or high-cost minions. But this is exactly the sort of card that you'd want in your deck against a deck like Face Hunter, because you are almost certain to win the Joust. And then when you do, you've gotten a 5/5 for 5 mana that restores 7 health to your hero. So you're basically getting a Guardian of Kings for 2 less mana. Which is super powerful. So I think this is actually a very good card in the right context. Like, this is a card that I imagine may replace Anti-Healbot in Paladin decks, because most of the context of wanting the life gain is against the more aggressive decks where you are very likely to win the Joust. You might end up getting screwed now and then if your opponent is playing like mid-range Hunter and has he happens to hit a Savannah High main or a Lotheb or whatever. But if you're playing a Paladin deck, most of where you want the life gain is against decks like Face Hunter, and this is a much more effective card in other matchups where the 3/3 body of an Anti-Healbot can actually be a huge liability. It's just not a powerful card. Whereas this, you're getting a 5/5 for 5 mana, which is not a great deal, but it's fine. It's the equivalent of a card like Lotheb, equivalent of a card like Harrison Jones. And it's a similar sort of tech style of card that has a reasonable effect and a reasonable body, and is likely to be effective where you do want it. So I expect this to be a card that does see play. And again, it's possible that this is a card that also changes the way that you want to build your decks. Like, if you are playing a Paladin deck that wants to be playing a significant number of Joust cards, maybe you don't want to be playing Zombie Chow. Like, maybe that's a card that that gets cut for cheap spells or something like that. It definitely is a card that an effect that you want to keep in mind when you are building your deck, because if you do have too many cheap minions in your deck, you can even lose to a Face Hunter deck in your Joust, which kind of suck. But it's definitely worth looking at the math as to what gives you what percentage chance of winning each given Joust, and see how comfortable you are compared to the guaranteed effects. So I think this is a card that is likely to see play, and I do think this is a very powerful card in the appropriate context, and I would not be surprised to see this replace cards like Anti-Keelbot or Guardian of Kings in Paladin decks that are looking for this effect. Argent Lance. This is another Joust card. Apparently Paladins really like to joust. And this is a card that is fine. One thing that is valuable about this is it is a 2-cost weapon for Paladins. Paladins up to now have primarily had to wait until 3 mana to get Coghammer or 4 mana to get True Silver Champion, in order to have weapons that can actually meaningfully interact with opposing minions. The problem with this, of course, is that it's only a 2-attack weapon, which means that you can't kill 3 health minions with it without some help. But I mean, this is a card that if you are looking to leverage your life total to kill opposing minions in early turns of the game, I could potentially see using in the place of maybe cards like Zombie Chow or cards like basically Zombie Chow. The problem that I find in many cases with Paladin decks and weapons is that so many of your good cards are weapon related that it's very easy to end up overloaded on weapons. When I was playing decks that had, I think Coghammer, for instance, is an extremely powerful card. Coghammer is a card that is super strong in lots of different situations, but I often find myself wanting to play no more than 1 and sometimes even 0 Coghammers in my deck, just because Muster for Battle and True Silver are also so good, and you can only really afford to have so many weapons in your deck because they conflict. If you have Argent Lance, you can't really Argent Lance into Muster for Battle, because especially if you hit 3 durability on Argent Lance, it's like, okay, well, I've totally wasted the value of this card by playing it and then playing Muster for Battle. So this is a card that I definitely think would be better if Paladins didn't already have so many good weapon cards. Muster for Battle in particular is just such an efficient card at what it does that I'm hard pressed to imagine cutting it in order to play a card like this. Warhorse Trainer. Now this is a pretty cool card. So anything that buffs Silverhand recruits clearly makes the Paladin hero power better. We've already seen that Quartermaster is extremely strong, but one of the problems with Quartermaster is that its cost compared to its effect by itself is pretty weak. Like Quartermaster, if you just play Quartermaster on 5, it doesn't do anything. Unless you have other guys in play, you've just paid 5 mana for a really weak minion. Whereas Warhorse Trainer, like a 2/4 for 3, is not a bad deal. It's not a great card. You're not jumping to play those stats, but a 2/4 for 3 can contest a 3/2 for 2 and win, come out ahead. And this is also a card that you can play and then play your Silverhand recruits because it's not a battle cry effect. This is an ongoing effect. So this is kind of like, assuming all of your other minions were Silverhand recruits, this is like a raid leader with 2 more health, which is, obviously that would, if raid leader was a 2/4, I think raid leader would be very powerful. Obviously not all of your other minions are Silverhand recruits, but this can enable your Muster for Battle, which is already the best card in most Paladin decks, to be much more meaningful. You can have more ways to enable your Muster for Battles to be powerful, and it also makes your hero power much stronger. If just establishing a couple of minions later in the game. So it's hard to say because there are so many good Paladin 3-drops, like Aldor, and I think that this might just not necessarily have the overall strength to sort of to fill those roles. But there are also other cards that we have seen that also interact with Silverhand recruits in this set. And I could potentially see a version of Paladin that was more focused on that than some versions that exist now. The problem being, of course, that the Paladin hero power right now is actually kind of dangerous to ever use. The Patron Warrior decks are so good at not only removing but even punishing 1/1 minions. That there's many cases that you get to certain stages of the game, and using your hero power as a paladin is not necessarily a good idea, but can even be a liability. You know, it's not necessarily like even valuable. It can actually lose you the game. So it's hard for me to imagine that those decks, without changes to Patron Warrior, will be meaningfully effective and competitive. But maybe there are actual changes to some of the cards in Patron Warrior, or maybe there are some cards in the Grand Tournament that will sort of shift the metagame such that Patron Warrior isn't the powerhouse that it is now.